All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Forest Products Society monthly webinar series, the Forest Products Insight. Each episode of the Forest Products Insights will welcome a guest speaker sharing the research, technical expertise, and experience to a live audience. This webinar is meant to be an open conversation where your questions can be answered and ideas shared amongst peers within the forest products sector. Please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and we'll have time at the conclusion of the presentation for oral questions as well. If you're not an FPS member, we also invite you to learn more about Forest Products Society and consider membership in the organization. Thank you again for joining with us today, and we look forward to engaging conversation, and thank you for your support of FPS. Without further ado, today's speaker is Kendria Huff, a recent graduate of Purdue University's Forestry and Natural Resources Master's Program. Her topic is evaluating the inclusion of circular economy practices in the furniture industry. We hope you enjoy the presentation, and we'll now turn things over to Kendria.
Thank you, Chris. All right, just gonna share my screen. Can everyone see that? Awesome. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, my research project was evaluating the inclusion of circular economy practices in the furniture industry. And let's just jump right into it. So before we get into the research, I just wanted to give a little background about myself. So I grew up in Hammond, Indiana, which is located in Northwest Indiana, about 30 minutes south of Chicago. So I spent a lot of time in the city working. I have a lot of family there. So it's a pretty important, special place to me. A little bit about my educational background. So I did just recently graduate from Purdue University with my Master's of Forestry, Environmental Sustainability, which is where I also received my, or where I also did my undergrad studies, receiving a BS of Forestry, majoring in Sustainable Biomaterials, and then also getting a minor in Natural Resources, Environmental Science, and a certificate in Environmental and Sustainability Studies. So currently I'm working in Seattle, Washington at the Port of Seattle. I actually started on their Maritime Environmental and Sustainability team as a graduate intern, and I've recently accepted a position to extend my time there as a green leasing specialist. So I'm essentially working on their program to incorporate sustainability terms into their standard lease agreements for their maritime landside properties. So it's a little different than what I came from, but it's been really interesting so far, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So just a quick intro about the motivation for the research. So essentially, this research kind of grew from the growing issue of furniture waste. So according to the EPA's recent reports, Americans throw out around 9 million tons of furniture and furnishings each year. We know that waste is a big problem in a lot of different sectors, but I think furniture is one that a lot of people don't really think about just because it's just so commonplace. Furniture does have pretty complex, or can have pretty complex structures. The inclusion of multiple materials can make recyclability, and those more positive waste patterns a little more difficult. So with that, and also these limited avenues for responsible disposal, fast population growth, and unsustainable consumer practices are leading to negative environmental impacts. So that's what this research is hoping to address. So just a little bit of background about the circular economy. So traditionally, most manufacturing processes are linear. So we have this take, make, waste mentality, which is also prominent within the furniture industry. And the circular economy is a concept that is trying to combat that. So by processing these materials strategically through these different cycles or value retention processes, we're aiming to reduce waste and the need for raw material extraction. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is kind of a leading entity within the circular economy space. To the right, you see this diagram that they developed that kind of showcases these two dynamics. So you have the biological side on the left and the technical side on the right, and different processes that they can go through to in turn, be incorporated into a circular economy. So traditionally, wooden furniture would be considered a biological product, obviously because it's developed from a bioresource. But we see furniture as a technical on this technical side, because it's a product that's used and not consumed. So we see these life extending processes such as reuse, repair, refurbishment, and recycling as a great way to reduce environmental impacts of furniture. So that's what this project is focusing on and how it kind of grew from. So within this research, we utilized 3 case study furniture products. So we chose these products because of their similar uses and lifespans and areas where they be utilized. So chair A is a solid maple wood chair, has a very classic sturdy design, a lifespan of about 10 years, mostly used in commercial or residential settings. But because of its sturdy and well-built design, it's not necessarily made to be disassembled. Chair B represents, our upholstered furniture. So it has this plywood core, polyurethane foam padding, metal fasteners, and then the fabric upholstery. Also has a life expectancy of about 10 years. Very well built, very sturdy, but also not really meant to be disassembled. And then chair C, made of solid birch wood, birch plywood, and metal fasteners, has about half the life expectancy. And we kind of consider this being in that fast furniture or the easy to assemble / disassemble furniture realm, which essentially has a short lifespan because of its, because of its construction and its build. It's a little less sturdy. So just a quick overview of the methodology that this research project went through. So each product, we conducted performance testing, so front to back cyclic load testing. To get the product level data, we disassembled each of the pieces, characterized the components, and measured and weighed them. And then for the process level data, so chair A and B, we were able to receive from an industry partner that we worked with. So from them, we were able to get the primary information about the production of each chair and materials and resources needed for that. And then chair C, we weren't able to work directly with the manufacturer, so we had to use information that was widely available online, and then also use some empirical data from a comparable research study that was done by Purdue's Wood Research Lab on a similar chair. And then to quantify, the impacts or the lack thereof that we want to see by utilizing value retention processes, we utilize a circular economy MATLAB model, which was utilized by the International Resource Panel on a previous study, and developed by one of our other collaborative researchers from Virginia Tech, Jennifer Russell. So all of this data was imported into this simulation and gave us the results that I will be going over shortly. So our results pretty much aligned with our hypothesis that the inclusion of value retention processes greatly decreases the environmental impacts of these products. So recycling wasn't really a process that was widely utilized within the furniture industry, so that was excluded from this research. So we mostly just focused on refurbishment, repair, and reuse. So as you can see here, each of the chairs that we studied, when including those value retention processes, the utilization of material requirements greatly increased. So these graphs aren't comparable across. So chair A, B, and C obviously had different material requirements and weights associated with them, but you can still see the great increase in that. And obviously there's no data showing for reuse, because obviously in reuse you're not utilizing any new inputs. So that's great. And these graphs are showing the value of the impact factors by the value retention processes used. So from the quantitative model, we got these environmental impact factors, which include new materials, production waste, embodied emissions, process energy, and process emissions. And these we can compare between each chair. But so as you can see, there's still a lot of decrease between creating a product brand new, which obviously would utilize the total materials that we calculated from our case studies, compared to refurbishing, repairing, or reusing the product. Chair B is where you kind of see where there isn't very many, where there isn't much of a decrease compared to creating a new product versus implementing the value retention processes. And we kind of saw this, we kind of saw some reasoning for this being that it's just the weight of the products and the amount that are utilized for this particular furniture piece just doesn't really have that much of a difference compared to when you have it newly made. So it's interesting to kind of see the difference between these products and how the design or the materials utilized kind of impact the differences that including these value retention processes can have. So I think it kind of did show that it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily trying to prove that one chair is better than the other, but that you do kind of have to look at these individual processes and components of a furniture piece or of the different end of life options that you have and how that might impact the environmental factors that you're looking at. So in conclusion, the implementation of circular economy concepts does avoid those wasteful practices and other environmental impacts associated with manufacturing of the new products, furniture. As I was mentioning earlier, the option to recycle isn't that prominent within the furniture industry, so utilizing these other value retention processes are more accessible and can add added value to a furniture product in its extended lifespan. Reuse requires the least number of inputs or no inputs at all, mostly. Can also have some positive social impacts. So we're finding that the reuse market offers more options for a wider range of consumers and can be a little cheaper for those that aren't really able to afford repairing or refurbishing their pieces. And then also the increased use of value retention processes can provide some employment opportunities. So we saw that in the refurbishment or the repair market, those skilled labor force is kind of dwindling. So if people were utilizing these processes a little bit more, it could, provide some bump into those realms as well, which I think will be great to see because, obviously it's a dwindling labor force isn't good to any respect. So putting some more weight to that, I think will be very beneficial in decreasing the environmental impacts of these products overall. Awesome, so thank you. And if there's any questions, open for questions.
Yeah, we've got a fairly small group, so please feel free to either enter questions into the chat box or unmute and you can ask a question straight to Kendria. I've got one, Kendria, that I'll lead us off with. How do we go about changing the mindset of, I guess, both manufacturers and consumers that furniture is disposable?
Yeah, I think, so on the manufacturing side, I think it's a little more difficult because you obviously don't want to hurt the bottom line. You don't want to sell less furniture necessarily, even though this is kind of what this research might be saying is that, less is better and reusing what you have is better than buying new. So that could seem like a negative to manufacturers, but I think what we're finding is that within a circular economy, there's more connections. So it's not that we're trying to separate this idea of there's manufacturers making things and then there's consumers buying things and there's not this connection. So with that connection, we want to see manufacturers integrating these processes within their own line of business. So if they have repair services or refurbishment services or, take back, that kind of includes them within the conversation. So they're not being left out. They're not, necessarily just reducing their sales or reducing their production. They're just altering their business models in a way. And I think for consumers and users, it's going to be a little more difficult as well. People want to stay in touch. They want to stay in style, or, they want to treat themselves to new things, which, not trying to knock that by any means, but it's just this idea of thinking of the bigger picture. So what you can do within the system to make less of an impact. So instead of thinking that your materials or your old furniture is waste, like think of what value is still in it and what you can do to prolong that value. And I think just having that mindset could help in understanding and knowing that there are other options for you instead of just taking it to the dump or leaving it on the curbside is really important, because I think that's just a lot of people don't realize that, or they don't realize the impacts that these furniture products or their waste does have on the greater ecosystem. So education, yeah, definitely being a big thing, and just having these options available is a big thing, because some people want to do good, they just don't know how, or they just don't have the resources available to them. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. If no one's like requesting it, then the market's not going to give it. But if the market doesn't have it, then people can't do it. So it's a weird kind of balancing act. But yeah, I think if everyone is kind of having that similar mindset, then these things can kind of happen concurrently.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else have questions?
So Kendria, besides chairs, did you look at any other furniture and how it could be used? Because I know chairs seem pretty standard. They don't have necessarily a whole lot of covering or anything else on them, but how would that affect, like on couches and things, how would that kind of change the recycling process and all of that?
Yeah, so we didn't, for this research, didn't expand the scope to other furniture products, but I think it can be adapted to those materials. Or I think this research kind of shows that the materials and the processes are big, factors that kind of impact the results. So with chairs and with couches or beds or something like that, if they have similar materials and somewhat similar processes, I think this research could be adapted to those products as well, and might possibly see similar results, but maybe not, because with the bed you have mattresses and all kinds of other stuff that change the scenario a little bit. But yeah, I think with those bigger pieces, it just becomes a little bit more complicated and more involved. So I think it's definitely worth looking into expanding this research into, you have a whole house of furniture, like study each of those pieces and what you can do and what impacts you might see. But for this research, we just kept it simple, or somewhat simple, and stuck with chairs or seating.
Anybody else? You can also ask Kendria any questions you want about the supply chain and ports, and she's got all the answers to that too. Just kidding.
No, I try my best.
That one may be above all of our pay grades.
Hi, can I make a question?
Please.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Kendria. Very nice presentation. Now I'm in Europe, so I see a little bit difference compared with America, and I wanted to take maybe an advice also by your side, what is the first step that we should do in order to convince people to buy, or to, in the concept of the reused furniture, recycled furniture, because here I can see that a new chair with a recycled chair doesn't have much change in the price. So for sure, people always tend to buy a little bit more expensive this chair that is new. So also the challenge is to convince this kind of mentality that it's also okay to buy a second-hand chair or a recycled chair. But then we see the issue in the concept of the price, that it's not really huge. So what is your advice in this kind of term?
Yeah, I think price is a big impact, because what we were finding is that was supposed to be kind of the positive attribute of buying reused furniture, was that you can go for a lower price. So the fact that people are selling it comparable to a new piece of furniture doesn't really help the case necessarily. So I think in that regard, you would kind of have to push the environmental aspects a little bit more if you can't really compete on price. And I'm not necessarily a master in marketing and sales and things like that, but yeah, I think you just kind of have to approach it from a different aspect. So if price isn't something that you can compete on, then yeah, competing on the environmental aspects or the social aspects of buying this product versus this product, buying a used product versus a new product, I think could help. And yeah, I think in America it's a little different. The mentality of, you know, buying reused or used things versus brand new, you know, people want to feel like, oh, this is brand new, it's shiny, it's nice, and used maybe can have some negative connotations that it's dirty or it's dingy or it's broken in. And so I think having that mentality shift is also important, and how to do that is is beyond me. You know, how do we get people to recycle? How do we get people to do a lot of things? But I think in marketing those things as like, it's not, you know, just because it's reused doesn't mean it's bad or doesn't mean it's worse off. Like, it's just, you know, pre-loved, I think is what is a nice way to kind of put it. But it's kind of all in how people are marketing it. I'm seeing a lot of reused furniture companies and markets kind of come up, and especially for like our younger generations, where having that environmental mindset is becoming very important. People buying reuse or like vintage furniture. Like vintage, I think is an interesting way to frame it. Like, that is more appealing to people than used. Like, oh, it's vintage, so it's cool, it's classic. Like, so just like the verbiage of things is really important. And how you frame like the conversation around those pieces, I think changes the mindset of consumers a lot too. And yeah, just making it just as nice, just as flashy, just as in style as, you know, new products, and hopefully having a price that was, you know, not comparable but reasonable. And I think that, yeah, that just kind of depends on the market. If people are able to sell things at that price that makes it a little more favorable to people to buy used versus new. Yeah, like I was saying, if you can't compete on price, then the environmental aspects, I think, is a really a good way to go. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can read the chat. So the chat question says, what do you think about wood chair compared to steel or plastic products in terms of reuse? This was also something interesting that kind of came up in the research. Obviously, coming from a wood products background, we want to push wood. Wood is good all the time. But I think in terms of steel or plastic, it kind of depends on the mix. So if it's an all plastic chair, it might be a little bit easier to break down or recycle if it doesn't have very many components added to it. I'm sorry, but you're talking about reuse. I think it just kind of depends on the durability of the product. Plastic, I think, can be pretty durable, but you know, if we want to promote a more environmentally sound product in terms of its embodied emissions overall, I think wood might be better. Steel also is, you know, very durable material, but at the same time might have greater environmental impacts over its whole life cycle in terms of its earlier embodied emissions. So I think it's hard to kind of compare like one to the other. For one aspect, I think that's what's interesting about this research, is that you kind of have to look at the full scope of the product to then make the most informed decision. But yeah, I mean, I'm always going to advocate for wood over other products for the most part. But yeah, steel or plastic, I think, could still have benefits in terms of recyclability if it's a little more homogeneous compared to wood that might have adhesives or other fasteners that are included that could make it harder to recycle or repair or disassemble. So hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up. On behalf of Forest Products Society, I'd like to thank Kendria and for presenting, and all of you for attending. This is a monthly webinar series. We do skip some months when around some of our events. Next up in January, we'll have Adriana Costa, but we do have some openings for later on in the year in 2022. So if you have a topic that you would be interested in presenting, we would certainly love to hear from you. And the sooner we hear from you, the sooner we can market and make sure that we've got a good audience for you. So if you have any interest in doing that, please feel free to reach out to Jennifer or myself or anybody with FPS, and we can talk about that. And with that, we'll conclude today's presentation. And again, thank you to everybody for joining us, and we will see you in 2022. Thank you and take care.
All right, thanks everyone.